Have you thought about taking creatine monohydrate? Well, this podcast is going to dive deep into that today. Hi, everyone. My name is Tracy Steen, and I'm your host of Move Daily Talks. Today, I'm welcoming to the podcast Dr. Darren Candow. Darren is a full professor and associate dean graduate studies and research in the Faculty of Kinesiology and Health Studies at the University of Regina. Dr. Candow supervises the Aging Medicine and Bone Health Laboratory and serves on the editorial review board for the Journal of Aging and Physical Activity, the Journal of International Society of Sports Nutrition, and Biogerontology. Dr. Candow has received over $1.5 million in research funding from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, Canada Foundation for Innovation, the Saskatchewan Health Research Foundation, and the Nutricia Research Foundation. And he's published over 100 journal and knowledge dissemination articles involving exercise and nutrition. Dr. Candow also serves as the Chief Scientific Officer for the TDF Sports. So this is going to be a great conversation today. Would you welcome with me Dr. Darren Candow? And here we are with Dr. Darren Candow. We are so excited to dive into this topic of creatine. And you know what is so funny is that creatine always autocorrects to creative. Anytime,
It does.
anytime I write it on Instagram or people are asking me questions, what kind of creative do you use? I always find that so funny. But it's creatine monohydrate, and you are the expert in that, which is why I'm so happy to have you on. Welcome to the podcast.
No, thank you so much for having me. I know we've tried to schedule this in a few times, so I'm super excited that we're able to do it this morning. Yes.
I know, and I'm looking forward, and I know our listeners are as well, just to learning more about this
Mhm.
because yeah, this is something obviously it's a supplement that has been around for years and years and years.
Mhm.
But we are just kind of hearing about it right now. What do you think has brought on this surgence of us looking at creatine as a supplement and wanting to try it?
Yeah, I think after we well established that, creatine can make the muscle, from a muscle perspective, work really well. Individuals are getting bigger, stronger, faster. It sort of pivoted to more health aspects. And there were some studies in the early 2000s that sort of introduced maybe some indices on bone or brain. And after that, it really started to sort of get and blossom into something a little bit more prevalent. And now it's considered one of the most widespread health supplements, probably because there's a lot more interest from a global perspective. Everything from pregnancy to young females to perimenopausal to postmenopausal. Athletes are always of interest, but we're starting to now get into more clinical applications. And I think we've really enhanced the science of understanding the dosage. It doesn't matter when you take it, what type is best. So we've really started to put forward more interest on a global perspective, not just for athletes.
And is this because, back in the day, back 40, 50 years ago, we just, there wasn't the studies that had been done? Is it just over this time and space, we've now, people and labs like your own have started doing different studies and then recognizing the science behind it? Is that what's happened?
Yeah, that's a excellent segue. It was kind of based on helping humans, primarily young males, and then all of a sudden, some animal research started to explore different mechanisms or different applications of creatine. I'll give you an example. In bone health, it was primarily done in the petri dish, and we started to look at bone building cells, use creatine for energy, and then it exploded to look at primarily bone health in females. So you're 100% correct. It's sort of become an avenue of future or interesting research moving forward. And, with Paris Olympics in 2 weeks, I would be very surprised if all the athletes have not either heard of creatine or potentially being on creatine for their specific sport if it entails that. And it's not just for anaerobic sports such as weightlifting. There's applications now for endurance type of sports for recovery. But I'm really interested in the health aspects, heart disease, leading into potentially for diabetes, osteoporosis, primarily for females. And then, of course, brain health has become a huge prevalent factor. So I've been really, really fortunate to be involved in an area that's a hot topic. We knew a lot in the late 1990s, and it kind of became stagnant. We kind of thought we knew everything about it. And now it's one, if not the most popular compound, even probably more than caffeine research, where we're starting to explore a lot of the health or therapeutic benefits.
Yeah, that's what I find hilarious because yes, 20 years ago, I knew what creatine was. I've been in this space in as a trainer for years. And I wasn't going to take it because I don't want to
Yes.
gain weight. I don't want to get puffy. And that's exactly what we were taught. It just
Right.
wasn't really for females,
Mhm.
right? But you're saying now that this research is coming that, I mean, pregnancy even,
Right.
how does it impact pregnant women? I'd love to hear about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so it's an interesting area. The majority of research obviously is coming from the rodent model or a speculative model or questionnaires for the female during pregnancy. But what the theory here is that females during pregnancy and for fetal development, it may be able to decrease inflammation or help maintain energy status during pregnancy. So there's a lot of potential applications for the mother and or fetal development to have a better energy status during pregnancy by primarily decreasing oxidative stress or inflammation. For those familiar with that, it's like taking an Advil when you're muscle sore or things like that. But Stacey Ellery in Australia is the world's leader, and she's come to the conclusion we need a lot, obviously, more long-term randomized control trials in humans. But right now, as it currently stands, there's no evidence to suggest it will cause any harmful effects. However, this is crucial for anybody listening. You need to get medical clearance, talk to your doctor
Yeah.
before you take creatine. Although we naturally produce creatine in our body, when you're taking a supplement, it may or may not be right for everybody. Overall, the safety profile of creatine is exceptional. We've done long-term clinical trials and no adverse effects. However, with pregnancy being such a unique population, please get medical screening for that. We don't think that creatine is transferred to the breast milk, probably because the transporter may not be in the mammary glands. We don't know 100% specifically, but it really seems to help maintain the energy status by decreasing inflammation or oxidative stress. But that's an area to keep your eye on for probably the next few decades when we start to get clinical trials in healthy females.
So most of our listening audience is definitely that menopausal women or perimenopausal women between 45 and 65 or 70.
Yeah.
And you mentioned just there that it could be beneficial in pregnancy for that reduction of inflammation. Well, we experience that now as estrogen drops,
Right.
right? We're getting inflammation in our 50s and 60s here.
Mhm.
Would it be a good supplement to take with that in mind for our age group as well?
Yeah, the evidence suggests it can be. Even starting in the fourth decade, everybody experiences something called low-grade inflammation. It's elevated, and most people say, "God, I have more muscle soreness than I did when I was in my 20s. Things hurt more often," and we think this low-grade inflammation is a main cause of sarcopenia or accelerated aging. And creatine does have anti-catabolic or anti-inflammatory properties. So some of the best research suggests that it may decrease inflammation. It may decrease protein breakdown. So that could be an adjunct to your normal lifestyle program. Hopefully, it involves exercise and proper nutrition, that it may help speed up recovery or decrease inflammation. And to your point, when we go through the menopausal transition, where the ovaries are not keeping up with the production of estrogen. And then obviously when we get to the postmenopausal stages where the cessation is almost there 100%, where estrogen is an anabolic hormone, now creatine may have some favorable effects on indices where estrogen was implicated. That's muscle and of course bone. And we actually now have done a few studies in our lab showing some clinical applications of creatine and exercise, not only in muscle performance for aging females, but also bone health. And I think that's really important for osteoporosis or offsetting frailty later on in life.
Let's just jump into that because I read that study of yours, the 2-year randomized
Yes.
controlled trial on creatine supplementation during exercise for postmenopausal bone health.
Mhm.
Um, this was exciting to see because yes, as we age, not only are we have the risk of sarcopenia, but of course, osteoporosis, osteopenia, the loss of bone mineral density. And this study highlighted specifically, was it the femur and neck? Yeah. Okay. I won't talk about it. You tell us, what did the study say in terms of what it does for our bone health?
Yeah, it was interesting because we looked at postmenopausal females for at least 24 months, and we put them through 2 years of supervised exercise, 3 days a week of weight training, and then 6 days a week of walking, trying to meet the Canadian recommendations for
Mhm.
cardiovascular exercise. And the interesting thing was that we also gave a very high dose of creatine monohydrate. So most of your listeners have probably heard 3 to 5 grams a day. We think as we get older, where we're having a reduction in muscle and bone loss with aging, we may need more. So we gave on average 11 grams a day, and that was broken up into 2 dosages. And they took that every day for 2 straight years. And
Wow.
I'm happy to report that there was no adverse effects over placebo. In other words, we measured their kidney and liver on an annual basis, and any fluctuations were identical to placebo. So we concluded that creatine caused no adverse effects. And remember, it was for 2 years. So that's very, very important. Just as important, we actually saw that creatine improved indices of bone health around the femur. So
Yeah.
this is really important because, obviously in Canada, in the winter months, if you were to fall, there's a greater chance that you may break your hip or suffer a fracture. And if you do that, you're immobilized for almost a year. So what creatine really did was preserve the strength of the bone, and in some areas, it actually improved it. So this could have application for females that may have a history of osteoporosis or frailty later on in life. That creatine, and again, this is important, it has to be with exercise,
Yeah.
may provide some bone beneficial effects. We also did see an improvement in muscle mass and gait speed in the females taking creatine compared to placebo. So overall, there was no detrimental side effects. And if anything, creatine has some small favorable effects to a population, remember, that we're already going through biological aging where everything likes to decrease. We're actually showing in that study, and it was really properly sample sized. We had over 200 postmenopausal females in Saskatchewan that it maintained and actually improved. And I think that's something to consider, especially as we get older. Most things decrease. If anything, exercise and creatine can cause a synergistic effect. But please note for the listeners, creatine by itself won't have any benefits. It can have some small acute benefits from a muscle perspective, but again, you must exercise
Yeah.
first, and then any supplement, including protein, has to come second. Exercise has to be the driving force.
Yeah. It's the number one lever to pull. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, can you eat? I should have asked you this at the very outset, but what is creatine? I know our bodies make it, but how did they create it in the lab? What is it
Yeah.
exactly?
Yeah. So for creatine, it's basically a nitrogen-containing compound. It's like an organic acid, but not to bore the listeners. It's kind of similar to protein or amino acids. So we naturally produce it through 3 amino acids, arginine, glycine, and methionine, which are found in all our food products. And
Yeah.
we produce this in the liver and the brain. And we've only come to light with the synthesis in the brain in the last few decades. But we also consume this in our diet through red meat or seafood primarily. So vegans, vegetarians, and those emphasizing a high plant-based diet are not getting a lot of creatine in their body. The good news is they respond exceptionally well to what we'll talk about now, commercial or creatine supplementation. All supplementation, if it's done in a valid lab, is vegan-based, and they're synthetically synthesized to be 100% creatine monohydrate. And I want to emphasize monohydrate because that's the only type that's been shown to be safe and effective. There's a lot of other marketed forms of creatine out there. I would really caution your listeners to spend the extra money because they don't need to.
Yeah.
Monohydrate's the original. It's kind of boring. It's just that boring white powder, but it's the
Yeah.
one that seems to work and be safe. So if you are considering supplementation, make sure you're looking for creatine monohydrate, and on the label, make sure it's third-party tested. And so that's really what it is. And it basically maintains the energy currency of our cells. So when we're exercising, you're starting to get tired, creatine may help offset some of that tiredness, and you can do a few more repetitions or exercise longer. And therefore, you can exercise at a higher capacity and get improvements. And then, of course, at a cell perspective, it does a lot more things to the bone, muscle, and of course, the brain. So we're naturally synthesizing about 1 to 2 grams a day. We also excrete about 1 to 2 grams down the toilet in the form
Okay.
of something called creatinine. And a lot of your viewers say, "Oh, I heard this is something that's
Yeah.
implicated in kidney failure." So that's a false positive usually. When creatine is broken down in your muscles, it's broken down not as creatine, but as creatinine. And if you look at your blood requisition form, you're like, "Oh, creatinine was checked off. The doctor wanted to measure that." They're simply measuring that to see how your kidneys are filtering this byproduct. But for those who take supplementation, usually that marker is elevated. So that's why you must tell your doctor you're on supplementation so they don't get alarmed when your creatinine could be elevated.
Yes, I always say that as well. And because people will in the comments invariably say that. Um, Now, I'll often post, I made a little cheat sheet of your dosages from one of your podcasts that
Mhm.
I've shared. I know you've seen it before. And when I share that and I talk about creatine usage, invariably there is someone in the comments that just
Mhm.
talks about the downside and how they're a nurse and they saw someone come in and, they had elevated levels of this and that and how detrimental it was. There's often one or two people that make those comments. And I'd just love for you to speak to who's it maybe perhaps contraindicated to, who should not be taking it, and if we are taking it and we start to have some issues, what might those be, where we should see a doctor and start to have this conversation?
Yeah, I think anybody that has pre-existing kidney or liver abnormalities, you have a history of dialysis, always talk to your nephrologist or GP to make sure creatine supplementation is right for you. There was a myth that creatine causes the kidneys and liver to work harder. I think what they mean is it just makes those kidneys work more efficiently because you're filtering more of the creatinine or dietary creatine that's coming in. And the kidneys and liver can handle that easily. I mean, it's almost arguing, do we need to cleanse every year? That's you have a liver and kidney that are doing that 24/7. So unless you have any substantial medical issues with those two organs, we're not really seeing any issues. The interesting thing is Health Canada recommends just consult with your doctor, even if you do have kidney or liver abnormalities. We've looked at dosages all the way up to about 11 grams for several years and having no adverse effects. So we're very confident in the safety profile of creatine. However, if you do take creatine supplementation and you go and get your blood work done and your creatinine or other liver enzymes are really, really high, that could indicate that your organs are not handling the supplement properly, or likely it's some other abnormality, such as an infection. COVID causes your liver enzymes to go high. So don't
Mm.
always think it's just supplementation. And usually, what happens, the doctor will say, okay, let's stop the supplement for 4 weeks. Let's measure you again. And 9 times out of 10, or 9.9 times out of 10, it goes back to normal. So it was just the metabolism of the supplement, not the supplement causing adverse effects.
Are we on creatine for the rest of our lives?
Mm. I've been taking it consistently for probably 2.5 decades. There was a myth, and this came from a rodent model taking a super physiological amount of creatine that it downregulated your natural production. The
Mm.
theory was there, but we don't see any human data, primarily from a protein content. So in theory, you can take creatine every day. We don't see any evidence to suggest no. There is some good speculation, though, that where the brain will make its own creatine, unlike muscle, maybe supplementation will downregulate the amount made by the brain. That could be a positive or negative thing. We're not sure. Maybe it gives the brain a bit of rest to do other things and it doesn't have to make its own creatine. Whereas remember, muscle doesn't make creatine. It has to take in everything from the blood. So there was a question, should I cycle creatine or take it every day? I think you do whatever's best for you. For those who say I like to cycle it, I'm like, no problem. Once your muscles are full, and that's usually as little as 3 grams a day for 30 days, it
Yeah.
stays there elevated for about 30 days after. So hypothetically, you've been taking creatine supplementation for 5 weeks and you go to Europe for a month, those elevated creatine stores are probably still going to be there once you come back. And for those traveling, if you do eat red meat or seafood, just eat a little bit more and that'll increase dietary creatine. So there's many ways to maintain that. But to answer your question, I think you can take creatine every day for the rest of your life. I plan on doing that, and I've been researching this quite often. I don't see any reason why you need to stop or cycle it.
Yeah, and a good note about the traveling as well, because I have packaged that little white creatine powder
Mhm.
in my Ziploc baggie. You're
Yes.
always sketchy going across
Yeah.
the border. You're like, okay, what are they going to think this
Yes.
is? Right. But so yeah, so you're saying we don't necessarily have to take it with us. We can take that little bit of a break. Is it more beneficial, I suppose, to build muscle if we just sustain that? And I know you say between 3 and 5 grams. Is there a big difference that you see in the science between those two, or does it really not matter at all? Like, may as well save money then if we only take 3 grams versus five, or what's the difference there?
Yeah. And I love this answer because it's evolved. So let's just break it up into three main areas of your body. And I think this is huge for your listeners. If you say I'm just taking creatine from a skeletal muscle perspective, like you're just improving, your bicep and things like that, you can take as little as 3 grams a day and take it daily for probably the rest of your life. However, we see that a little bit more has some advantageous effects. But from a bone health perspective, the lowest dose ever been shown to be effective was 8 grams.
Right.
And
Okay.
then when we get into the brain or the neck up, there's two schools of thought. You can take 4 to 5 grams a day, but you need to take that for several months. The best studies show 20 grams a day for at least a week seems to be needed to accumulate. It's probably because the brain has the blood-brain barrier. It's like a barrier allowing foreign toxins to get in. And so that's why the amount going to the brain is blunted. So from a whole body perspective, we just put out a paper, and this is my opinion, but is based on some data. I take 10 grams a day, and I break it up into 2 5-gram amounts. So I usually have a pretty high protein breakfast. I have like Greek yogurt, collagen, whey protein, and I throw my 5 grams in there and I mix it up. It's tasteless. You never notice.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
I actually put 5 grams in a water bottle and I drink that when I'm on the Peloton or lifting weights. And I find that's an easy way to get my 10 grams.
Sure.
Do you need to start with 10? No. Again, I've been taking it for decades straight. And I probably have maximized my muscle stores. As I get older, I'm trying to maximize my ability to maintain bone. And I certainly need to maximize my brain health. I think with sleep deprivation, jet lag, when COVID was here, we still see long COVID. Most people are sleep deprived or having a lot of metabolic stress. I think increasing the amount can have some brain applications. And we see really good evidence that when people are sleep deprived, a higher dose seems to maintain cognition. So there's an evolution to the dose, but I think if you're just thinking of starting it, start with 3 grams a day. Maybe see that for a week to two, see how you feel. You should not notice any adverse effects. The only time you might notice an adverse effect is if you did that athletic loading phase of 20 grams a day. That's where people say, geez, I gained 3 pounds that week, or I feel a little bloated. Keep in mind, creatine is osmotic. What I mean by that is when it's in the body, it likes water. And of course, water will go with creatine. And if it goes in your muscle, you may retain more creatine or water there. So just please note that that's acute water retention. It does go away, but it's by far the number one reason, especially young females are very hesitant to take creatine because they said, oh, I heard it leads to gaining weight. I have some strategies. If you want, we can talk about how to alleviate that. But please don't do the loading phase. On the back of all these products, it usually recommends it because it's the most effective way to saturate your muscle, but you don't necessarily need that loading phase.
Right. We're not athletes. We're not competing next week where we really need to saturate. Like, come on, let's just take it slow. Yeah. And the thing is too, I think you're exactly right. People think they are gaining fat, but it's not fat. It's just like you said, water, right? It's not like all of a sudden we've increased in body fat percentage, but let's dive into that because yes, women definitely are scared to take it because of that. It's an old mindset,
Right.
certainly that has gone around, an old adage. So let's debunk that myth about weight gain and creatine.
Yeah, so two big things is that we put out two meta-analysis now on fat mass. And one of the biggest things is, oh, I've gained weight. Actually, creatine reduced body fat from adults 18 and above. It was very, very small, but they weren't gaining. So usually what happens is when you take creatine in combination with exercise, you increase lean mass. Your body fat either stays the same or likely decreases. So if there is a fluctuation on the scale, please note it's primarily water. If it's over the long term, it's going to be lean tissue mass or muscle mass, which is a very, very favorable thing.
Sure.
If you don't want the chance of getting water retention, here's my suggestion. Start with 3 grams a day, but I want you to break that dose up into two. So take 1.5 grams in the morning, which is a 1/4 of a teaspoon at most. And then at least 6 hours later, take another 1.5 grams. You can just mix it in water or juice or combine it with food.
Yeah.
After about 7 days, maybe increase it up to 5, but again, divide that up into 2.5-gram dosages. And then by then, your body's going to be adapted to having to supplement. We've done this numerous times. We're actually doing this right now in 2 studies in our lab. And our theory is that the smaller the dose, the greater the chance of absorption, retention, and less being excreted. So you may get actually some more favorable effects. Can you take all 5 grams at once? 100%. You could actually take 20 grams at once, and some studies have done that as too. But that's where we see GI tract irritation or some acute weight gain. Remember, if we're only producing about 2 grams a day and you take 20 grams, a tenfold increase could have some adverse effects. I only recommend the loading phase to old adults or going through rehabilitation or athletes. And to your point, if you're taking creatine for the health applications, I think you can just take it, whatever's convenient for you.
We hear a lot of people also ask about bloating, and it's interesting because I know for myself, I've been taking it for about 2 years, but I supplement with a good whey protein.
Mhm.
So I'm like, which one is causing the gas and bloating?
Right, right.
Both and? What's
Yeah,
your
it could.
thought
Yeah,
on that?
that's right. Yeah, it's the high nitrogen compound, and the bloating would probably be more of the creatine with the osmotic drag. But now there's been a few studies when you combine creatine and protein together, you get greater increases in lean tissue mass. So that's something that some viewers may say, oh, if I put my creatine in Greek yogurt or
Yeah.
smoothie, whichever, it could have some favorable effects. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good. Your breakfast is exactly what my breakfast is every day.
Okay.
Protein, collagen
Yes.
powder, Greek
Yeah.
yogurt, and the creatine. I
Okay.
love it. Okay. So with those higher dosages, you did some studies definitely looking at that brain health and
Mhm.
cognition and memory function. Can we just talk a little bit about that I mean, we can do that now
Mhm.
I'm 54, so at this age, or my mom, say for an example, she's at 76. Should she be taking creatine at that age and starting that repertoire later in life for those benefits? She does work out as well, so she's getting that.
Right.
But also, let's talk about the brain health benefits.
Yeah, we are in its infancy. We need a lot more research to sort of come to the conclusions. And even the area of cognition is really sort of transcendent in the last few years. So we're not seeing any reason why someone can't take creatine. The effects are there, but they're very, very small. So there's a little bit of caution with the brain, primarily because the brain does make its own creatine, so it may not need supplementation. The brain also has a blood-brain barrier, says, hey, all creatine, you go to muscle and bone, we're okay from the neck up, except when the brain is stressed. And that's usually every day in most humans. So I'll give you some
There.
examples. Jet lag, sleep deprivation, hypoxia. What if you have to work from midnight to 8 a.m.? Your sleep is all jeopardized. We only see the effects of creatine being beneficial when the person or the brain is metabolically stressed.
Mm.
So let's just stop there for a second. If you're a young, healthy individual exercising adequate sleep, you're not going to notice any cognitive or memory benefits from creatine. The populations we start to see some benefits are in older adults, which may make sense. As we get older, we're more predisposed to dementia or related diseases. The brain relies on creatine very similar to muscle, but when you're sleep deprived or you feel foggy, students had to stay up all night to cram for a midterm, jet lag, that's when we see creatine help maintain cognition and memory. So the best evidence is creatine may come to the rescue after traumatic acute responses. So for example, you're in Kelowna, you say, hey, we're flying to Paris to watch the Olympics. You're going to be jet lagged, but those few days after on creatine, you may not be as foggy, or when you come back to BC, you're not going to have as much jet lag from a mental perspective. Those studies are there. The effects are not magical. They're not large, but they are there, and that we're starting to see that more prevalent. But we really don't see any major effects, if any, in healthy individuals where they're like, I get 8 hours of sleep, my diet's great, I'm exercising. You're not going to see it. And it kind of makes sense. It's not a cure. It's there to just help. But I've certainly noticed that when I take more creatine, up to 10 grams a day, it's certainly helped from a cognitive perspective. And when I know I'm flying overseas, I'm going to China in October, I will take the loading phase for about 2 weeks
Ah,
just because it's such a daunting task to get there and come back. It may help from a cognitive perspective. But then after I get home, I go back to my normal 10 grams. So even for myself, which I would venture a guess, I have some of the most saturated cells on the planet. I've been taking creatine quite long. I still like to have that extra bit for the chance it could help. Again, there's no detrimental effects, so I'm willing to take that. Yeah.
is there an age where don't bother. Like I'm thinking about my parents, do I start them on that? Or is it like, you know what, you're probably good. You probably got the bone that you're going to have. You probably have the muscle that you're going to have. Is there an age that it's too late to start?
Yeah, so actually opposite from a physiological perspective and based on the mechanism, I think as we get older, we need more reliance on creatine and probably at a higher dose, just because usually all our cellular systems are decreasing or going through more inflammation as we get older. So I think as we get older in the fourth, fifth, and later on, we actually might need more. And now I recommend to take creatine daily, not just on the days you work out because some of that creatine will trickle into your bone and hopefully have some brain health benefits. So, in the 20s, 3 grams a day might be great. And maybe as we get older, we need 5 or more. But if you're looking at it from a whole body perspective, we're trying to offset the rate of biological aging. And of course, the brain is susceptible to that as well.
I'm glad you said that. I think some people just think, oh, on the days I work out, that's when I'll use the creatine. But
Right.
yes, it's a continuous dosage forever and ever,
Right.
forever and ever.
That's right.
Um, any research where it's enhanced or improved our mental health, depression, anxiety, any of our mental health disorders?
Yeah, there's actually some really fascinating research. There's a group out of Utah that are fantastic, looking at clinical depression and some symptoms of anxiety. And when the group of females who were clinically depressed, again, staying on their normal medication regimen, added creatine to that, they had a substantial improvement in depressive symptoms. In other words, creatine seemed to decrease the symptoms of depression and help them recover quicker. We do not know, can creatine have some antidepressive symptoms in a clinical population without medication. We don't know that. And again, anybody listening, if you are on antidepressive medications, please stay on that.
Yeah.
There's no evidence to suggest that creatine will actually replace. Again, please talk to your psychiatrist or other medical practitioners. But there's some really fascinating research to suggest that creatine may help in those symptoms of depression, anxiety, and actually in PTSD, which I think will be huge for the military or veterans. And I know the USDA and the US military has just approved creatine to be added to their pre-made meals for the US military. So that could have huge implications as well from a cognitive perspective.
Wow, that is interesting.
Hmm.
Do you feel like it is possibly improving mental health benefits? Because if we're dosing with creatine, then we're working out because the two go hand in hand, and it's the exercise that can increase serotonin and improve our mood, elevate our endorphins, and it's that, or is it in combination, or what's the mechanism that it would possibly enhance our symptoms?
The most consensus mechanism is just like muscle, it decreases inflammation or oxidative stress during those times of metabolic stress. So it really seems to sort of recover the brain tissue quicker. And that's why there's a thought of when we sleep on creatine, we don't need as much. So when you're sleeping, obviously the brain tissue is recovering. There's been some anecdotal research, or a lot of people say, I don't need as much sleep when I'm on creatine because maybe creatine is helping repair or recover the tissue from an energy status. And that needs to be proven from research, but you hear that quite often. So we think the main mechanism from the cognitive perspective is decreasing inflammation or oxidative stress. But exercise, we still can't measure all the endorphin release and all the magical things that exercise causes. But when you combine the two, you may get a synergistic effect. Yeah.
High blood pressure and creatine?
No evidence to suggest it has any adverse effect on heart function or blood pressure. And we actually have a paper coming out to suggest that there's no adverse effects. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I'm asking all of the questions of my family.
Right. Okay.
I want to get all the answers.
Right.
Darren, is there any future research that you're
Mhm.
getting excited about? What do you see coming up in the future?
Yeah, we actually have about 5 studies going on in the lab right now. We're really interested in the older population to look at micro dosing or smaller amounts, as I mentioned, maybe 2.5 grams twice a day compared to 5 grams in a bolus. But COVID really sort of
Yeah.
sparked an interest in my ability to think of a research design. And when the government said stay home, that was the worst thing they probably could have did from a health perspective. So we're starting to use these elastic or resistance bands for viable ways for older adults to still train at home. This is great for retirees or in long-term care facilities, and maybe get the beneficial effects of creatine as well. So we have a number of studies looking at the health implications. I'm collaborating with researchers now in the United States to look at creatine on dementia. And the big main focus for me is on creatine for females across the lifespan. And I'm collaborating with some really good researchers at the University of Idaho. So we've sort of looked at postmenopausal females. We've really done a terrible job looking at the perimenopausal stage. From 40 to 50, that age group seems to get left out, but we really need to go back to 18 when you're a biological female. Can that improve muscle and bone? Can we measure that later on and have some advantageous effects? So we're really excited to start to focus on biological females and look at the transition across the lifespan. And I think that'll be a big focal point for the next 2 decades of my research.
I am so excited to hear that too, because of course I'm right in the throes of that. And those are the people group that I'm working with. So I look forward to reading all of that coming from you. Do you have a book or anything? I mean, you've written over 100 studies, I know, but is there a book in the works?
No, there's no book. No, I haven't been offered anything like that. But
I'm sure it's
I always
coming.
get excited with the research papers because it's new, evolving research, and it's been a popular with presentations and conferences, but no book yet. Yeah, maybe down the road.
Maybe down the road for sure. Where can people find you on your socials? I'll link it in the show notes, of course, but let us know where people can find you and follow you.
I think Instagram is the most popular. So at Dr. Darren Candow, and I try to post a lot of cutting edge research, not just on creatine, but bone or exercise and things like that. And so at Dr. Darren Candow seems to be the easiest place to get a hold of me.
I love it so much. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all of our listeners. And remember to go move daily in your fitness, wellness, and nutrition. And we'll see you in the next Move Daily Talks.